Hello, today I'm going to show you how to make one of these sweet little zipper pouches. I've made these from offcuts of fabric, but you can use whatever you like. This was in fact an old curtain and I've lined it inside with a blue cotton. Again, that was an offcut. They have boxed out bottoms. I'll show you. Boxed out bottoms, and this one's lined in a check. They make nice little bags. You can use them to put your makeup in. I have one which I use to put all my medications in. You can put some of your sewing notions in them. Anyway, let's get started. Now to make this little pouch. Cut 2 pieces of fabric. This is your main fabric, 9 inches by 7 inches or 23 centimetres by 17.5 centimetres. Then you want 2 pieces of lining fabric, 9 inches by 7 inches or 23 centimetres by 17.5 centimetres. You will also need 2 pieces of fusible interfacing or fusible fleece, up to you, of the same measurements, or you can do like I do and cut about ½ an inch shorter on each side. You will also need an 8-inch zip or longer and 2 pieces of contrasting fabric, 2 inches by 2 inches or 5 centimetres by 5 centimetres. The tools you'll need for this project are scissors or rotary cutter, snips, ruler and tape measure, pins or clips, tool to push out the corners, fabric pen or chalk, thread, sewing machine, iron, and hopefully not, but possibly an unpicker. Measure your zip and cut it down to the required size. In this case, it's 8 inches. Take one of your 2-inch by 2-inch pieces of fabric and place over the zip with right sides facing at the top, and then fold over at each side and then pin or clip in place. I find that clips are better for this job. Repeat the same process at the other end of the zip. The end with the opening is a little bit more tricky, so make sure that the 2 sides are centred and maybe put an extra clip or pin in the centre to hold in place. Then sew across the top, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish. Do the same to both sides, and then turn the tabs the right side out at both ends, and then finger press the sides over at both ends. I cut about 1/8 inch off the end because it's a little bit too long. I fold over to meet the end of the zip, and then I fold it over again. Pin or clip it in place, and then do exactly the same with the other side. Now sew the tab to the zip about 1/16 inch away from the edge, back tacking at the start and the finish, and do exactly the same to the tab at the other end. With right sides together, so we want our zip facing down on the top of our fabric which is facing up, pin our zip to the fabric, leaving ½ an inch at each side. So, starting at the zipper tab, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start. The zipper should be slightly open to begin with. When you reach the zipper pull, with your needle down, lift your presser foot and close the zip fully. Then continue to sew to the end of the zipper tab, back tacking at the end. Now pin or clip the other side to the zip with right sides facing, leaving ½ an inch at each side. So, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and finish, remembering to move the zip pull out of the way as we pass it. Clip or pin the lining to the first side with wrong side of the bag facing up. Place the lining right side down over the left side of the bag and pin to the right side zip. I like to get it in place, then pinch both corners of the bag and flip it over. Then either clip or pin in place. Sew on the fabric side, not the lining side, so you can see your previous stitches. I find it makes it easier to sew this way. Remember to back tack at the start and the finish, and when you get to the zipper pull, move it out the way so you can pass it. For the second piece of lining fabric, place it over the first piece of lining fabric, right sides together, pinch together and flip it over, and pin or clip to the zip on the far side. So, taking a 1/4 inch seam allowance and back tacking at the start and the finish, leaving ½ an inch at each side, and sewing on the main side, not the lining side, and of course remembering to leave ½ an inch at each side. Now with your iron, press the seams, press away from the zip on the lining side and the front side. We're going to top stitch next, so if you want to, you can pin along the side of the zip. It's entirely up to you. I don't usually bother to do this but you can if you want to. Then we're going to top stitch, starting at the end of one of the tabs and taking about 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along, removing the pins as we go. We're going to sew all the way down one side, and when we get to the tab at the end, we're going to lower our needle, lift our foot up, turn around and sew over the tab right at the edge, about 1/16 of an inch from the edge. We're going to turn around and sew back down the other side of our zip, again taking about 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. I've left my zipper foot on to do this, but you can actually do this with your normal sewing foot. It's up to you. Cut off any loose ends. With right sides together, pin or clip the bag together. Start at one of the top corners and pinch the top together and push the zip tab towards the lining side, and then you can see our 1/2 inch overlap. We're going to clip starting there, and then we'll clip the rest of the side of that bag, and then go over to the other corner, do exactly the same. Try and keep the lining out of the way and pinch the top together, pushing the zip tab towards the lining, and you should have that 1/2 inch overlap, which we clip with one of our clips, or if you're going to pin it with one of your pins. And that's the difficult part of the pinning or clipping done, and then you can carry on clipping or pinning the rest of the bag. Now we're going to sew around the bag, starting at the top right hand corner, and we're going to take a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance so we don't sew over the tabs. Start sewing just to the side of the tab and back tack at the start. Then continue to sew all the way round, taking a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, remembering to back tack at the finish. Ideally, I should have opened the zip before sewing round the sides of the bag, but I didn't, so I'm doing it now. Now pin or clip the lining together, but leave a gap of 3.5 inches to 4 inches along the bottom edge to turn it the right way out. Mark the gap with either chalk, dressmaker's chalk, or a fabric pen. Now start sewing from the top right hand corner, taking a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start, sew down to the corner, and then leaving your needle down and lifting your presser foot, turn, lower your presser foot, and then sew to the mark that you made for turning the right way out. Back tack, and that's the first side finished. Now starting at the other side, we're going to do exactly the same, taking a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to sew from the corner all the way down to the mark that we made. Next, clip all 4 corners. So cut the corners off about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. Do not cut into the seam, otherwise you're going to make a hole in your pouch. Next, we're going to box the corners. To do this, you take each side of the corner and pull it out, and make sure that the side seams are lined up. So the front and the back side seams should be lined up. When you're happy that they're lined up, put a pin in it, and do exactly the same with all 4 of the corners, lining up the seams, the side seams, to make sure they're both in the centre. Next, I measure 1.5 inches across the corner, making sure that the centre line where the seam is at the 3/4 mark. So you've got 2 sides of 3/4 each. So you measure, making sure 3/4 of an inch is on the seam. Continue and do the same for all 4 sides. You now need to sew across all of the 4 lines that you drew across the corners, back tacking at the start and the finish. Do exactly the same for all 4 corners, including the lining. Now trim all 4 corners close to your stitching, about 1/8 of an inch away from all of your seams. Next, we need to turn it the right side out. So turn it from the hole that you left in the lining, pull all of the pouch the right way out, and use a tool or a knitting needle to push out the corners. Make sure that you push all those corners right out, and especially those zip tabs. They can be a little bit tricky to get out. We just need to close the opening that we left for turning the right way out. So I'm going to slip stitch this closed, but if you wanted to, you could take it over to your sewing machine and just sew it together. It will be perfectly acceptable because it will be on the inside and nobody can see it. But I'm going to slip stitch. If you want to know how to slip stitch, I do have a separate video which I will share in the link below on how to slip stitch. All that's left to do now is to give your pouch a quick press and put the lining back inside, and we're all finished. Thank you very much for watching. Please could you like and subscribe. Thank you.